There's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down, and shut down, the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Hey kids, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Just a Game. So glad you could spend some time with us. There are things to be debated, there are things to be discussed, but before we do that, how the hell are you? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. I'm Rob, you're you. It is Just a Game. We are live in the Oodle Noodle studios. Coming up today, rather heavily, I would say, weighted towards the heroes of hockey in this city. Former Flames coach and currently plying his trade over in Switzerland, although he's back. Friend of the program, Rob Cookson. Cookie's going to join us. We will take him back in time a little bit as today's a rather significant day in Flames history, which brings us to our first guest coming up in a little while. The great, the unbelievable, the legend, the man, the myth, Peter Maher will be joining us. Lots to talk about with Pete. Lots to talk about with Rob. Obviously, the Flames' search for a new coach is top of that, but I suppose topping that is the search for the general manager. The election is underway. The building is a hot topic. It continues to be debated widely out there. It is a part of this election cycle, good, bad, or indifferent. The arena's something to talk about, and let's lay it all on the line. The playoffs have been very, very interesting. Continued into round number 2 last night. A pair of games. We'll start with Florida and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And again, hey, how about those plucky Panthers? That's all right. Maple Leafs will take them out in 3. Well, not to be not listening to the script, I guess, were the Panthers, who played just 2 nights before in Boston. Matthew Tkachuk, with another strong, fine performance, 3 assists, got under the skin of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Just a game in which, they outshot the Maple Leafs. Does this sound familiar if you're a Flames fan? But they outshot the Panthers, I should say. The Maple Leafs outshot the Panthers. Does this sound familiar as a Flames fan? Because they were chasing. The Panthers kept the lead, got the lead, stayed with the lead, the Maple Leafs tried to come back, and Florida just continued their game plan from their series against Boston, and it serves them well. It serves them well. They're up 1-0, that's all. I mean, it's a lot of hockey left to be played. The other series that started last night also featured a road team that had played just 2 nights before, and it was the Kraken winning in overtime 5-4. What a bizarre game. I don't know how sexy viewing this is for people. If you're a diehard hockey fan, you're going to turn it on. If you're kind of casual, I'm not sure you would have gone and found this game. 3 goals in 52 seconds for Seattle in the first period. Jake Ottinger looked average at best. But then, cue the Stars. They scored twice in the third period, tie it up. And then Joe Pavelski has all of those goals. So he had assists on all those goals. He had all those goals. 38-year-old Joe Pavelski, with 4 goals, becomes the oldest player in NHL history by almost 2 years to achieve that feat. But in the end, it was Gordy, formerly of the Tampa Bay Lightning, one of the Yanni Gordy, who everybody likes, the depth players that Julien Brisebois and the Lightning seem to create, like Blake Coleman. These players go out to other franchises and seemingly have success. And Yanni Gordy providing Seattle with a victory last night on the road against the Dallas Stars. 2 games tonight. The one game that I'm sure we'll talk about, but not necessarily paying as close attention to, is Jersey and Carolina. You look at their season series, pretty tight. In a lot of ways, these are similar teams, good young offensive players, solid goaltending. Schmid has been a little bit of a story coming out of nowhere to the American Hockey. Well, he played 20 games in the NHL, but coming from the American Hockey League and playing that series for the Devils. But, Carolina's got 2 goalies, and Carolina just quietly goes about their business. I don't know if this is going to be an exciting series, but I would suspect it might be a long series. And then the one that most of Canada will be paying attention to, because it is, including a Canadian team, one from this province, it is Vegas and Edmonton. An interesting note from Jason Gregor up in Edmonton, I believe was on Daily Faceoff today. The Oilers have lost 6 game ones in a row. Vegas has lost 5 game ones in a row. Nobody will win this game tonight. They're going to keep playing it in perpetuity. That's how it's going to work. All right, a little later on in the program, Rob Cookson will join us. I do have to get to one of the big stories of the day later on, and that has to do with the NHL being absolutely given a gift, an absolute gift on a silver platter. But before we get to that, that's later on in the program. You'll stick around for the podcast. Let's do this right now, courtesy of our friends at Ski Cellar Snowboard. 76 years in Canada. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? 76 years. 3 locations right now that are open. McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, Bow Ridge Road Northwest. And if you're like me and you like a good deal, now is a good time to get a deal. Sure, it's 26 degrees outside, and maybe the last thing on earth you're thinking about is warm clothing. But there's some good deals on warm clothing, and I will guarantee you at some point we will need that warm clothing. Always a pleasure to join our favorite guy. He is the legendary voice of the Calgary Flames, and I found out for the first time, I did not know this, but also noted boxing announcer Peter Maher. Peter Maher joining us this afternoon. How are you, sir?
Pretty good, Rob. Pretty good. Not ready for a boxing match, though.
No. This shouldn't be too much of a fight, Pete. I think this one will go pretty smoothly. Having said that, you and I were having coffee on Sunday, and like we do every once in a while, we're just kind of chewing the fat. And I thought I knew the Peter Maher biography, but you had left out one little piece for me. Can you, just for the benefit of our audience, talk about your experience calling a professional boxing match?
Well, Rob, that was back in 1979. At that time, I was doing the radio play-by-play broadcast for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the radio station, which is now defunct, the CKO radio network, they purchased the broadcast rights for the welterweight championship match featuring Clyde Gray, the Canadian, and Thomas Hearns, the Detroit boxer that went on to have a great career.
Yep.
And so this bout was in Detroit, and so the radio station manager came to me and he said, "We've got the rights to this fight. We don't have a broadcaster for it. Would you be interested in doing it?" I said, "Well, I've never. The only fights I've ever called were hockey fights, which is a little bit different than boxing matches. But if you'd like, I can give it a try." So sure enough, went over to Detroit, where the fight was being staged at the old Olympia. I had broadcast hockey games from there. And actually, the broadcast booth in the old Olympia for hockey was probably the best broadcast booth that I ever called games from. It was a great location, and it provided lots of fan noise and all that type of thing. So anyway, I wasn't in that broadcast booth for this match, but I was at ringside, right at ringside. I walk in there, and I'm surrounded by all these boxing people, all these boxing greats that you heard tell of, some I hadn't heard tell of. And anyway, I'm there for the preliminaries, and I'm doing a little bit of play-by-play and fight punch-by-punch play-by-play in my head as I watch some of these preliminary matches. And then, of course, it comes to the main event. And so I called the fight. and it lasted 7 rounds before Hearn scored a knockout victory over Clyde Gray. So that was my boxing announcing experience, and it was a real neat experience to do that. But I don't know how good I did. The hardest part, I thought, was was between rounds when you had a minute there, and I didn't have a color commentator. I had to fill in the time myself. So my lack of knowledge of boxing may have been explored at that particular point, but the punch by punch, I was able to do that pretty good.
Yeah, I was about to say that, Pete, that some things never change. Typical radio, they send you there with, it's not like you had Jim Lampley or Jim Gray or somebody to help you out, or George Chavallo. They send you there by yourself, one man, to do the fight. So some things never change, Pete.
That's true. That's very true, Rob. So anyway, it was a good experience. So
yeah, and again, I had no idea. So hockey, obviously, you've done men's and women's, you've done Olympics, you've done world championships, you've done your son's game, you've done football, you've done boxing. What else? What am I missing, Pete, on that resume?
well, I did softball.
Okay.
Back in my hometown in New Brunswick.
Right.
Campbellton, New Brunswick. It wasn't on radio. It was I was in the broadcast, the PA announcer for the local softball tournament there. So, and they kind of like me doing a little bit of play-by-play where so-and-so hits the ball and so-and-so runs out, catches it, or the ball goes over the fence for a home run. So I made it more like a play-by-play. So, but I never did do a baseball game. But softball, I did quite a few of those in that position. And I started doing that when I was 16 years old. So
it's like 20 years ago.
I started young.
Yeah. Well, we're burying the lead. It seems like, we need to maybe do these visits a little more frequently, Pete, because when last we spoke, a little bit of news has dropped around the local hockey heroes, including a new arena in principle, and now looking for a new coach. Let's maybe stay current. Your initial reaction to the news on Monday, Don Maloney announcing that Daryl Sutter will not be coming back?
Well, I guess in some ways I wasn't surprised, given some of the word that you were hearing around about that things were not being liked so much, the coach not being liked so much by the players on the team. But still, at that point, I thought maybe since Daryl had 2 years remaining on his contract after getting the extension last year, I thought that maybe the ownership of the Flames, headed by Murray Edwards, might say, no, we want Daryl staying in as coach of the team. But I guess after an analysis of interviews with players and agents, apparently, and trainers and management and ownership, they decided that it was best to part with the Daryl, even though he does have 2 years left in his contract and will have to be paid somewhere in the vicinity of between 8 and 9 million US for his not to work as coach of the Flames. So it was disappointing for me in some ways, is that I thought I still think Daryl's an extremely good coach. And Don Maloney, who's now the interim general manager and president of hockey operations, basically said that in his comments that came up last Monday. But he is a demanding coach. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I was around him for 7 years when he was the first time he was here as coach of the Flames, and then coach and general manager, and then general manager by taking the coaching situation out of his own hands and handing them over to Jim Playfair, and then it went on to Mike Keenan and others. And speaking of Mike Keenan, interestingly, if I can direct another point here, Jerome McGinley was here in Calgary on the weekend, and he was involved in some promotional and charity events, and somebody in the media asked him who the best coaches were that he had in his career, and he said Daryl Sutter and Mike Keenan. Mentioning Daryl didn't surprise me. A little bit surprised that he mentioned Mike Keenan. Keenan, incidentally, is over in Italy right now, and he's preparing coaches there as Italy's hosting the Olympics in a couple of years. And they're going to have a team in Group A. So Mike is over there, help lecturing coaches and players, and maybe he might be coaching that Italian team in the Olympics next time around. Now that's off track.
Yeah, no, it's not off track, because I saw the same thing, and I had to take a double take. Knowing what I think I know about Jerome liked to be challenged, and Jerome had no problems, but Jerome also wanted the puck, and he wanted to play. And both of those coaches allowed Jerome to play. I always felt Keenan, like I was slightly almost even embarrassed for his legacy in a way. I just didn't think those 2 years were very good. I don't know, it just felt awkward with him in Calgary, but I saw that and I said, well, that's the difference between watching and being in the dressing room, right? And he was in the dressing room every day, and he must have liked the way that Keenan pushed the buttons, right?
Yeah. That's the only conclusion I could come to as well on that. So that was quite interesting. But to get back to the Darryl situation, I don't know if you saw it today or anybody that's listening or watching saw it, but in the Calgary Sun today, Rick Bell.
Yes.
Rick Bell is the
a very
TV
significant difference.
Don't get them confused. This is Rick Bell. He's a columnist in the Calgary Sun.
Yep.
Most of the time, he talks about politics and City Hall and the province and federal government and all that stuff. But today, he tackled the Darryl Sutter situation.
Yep.
And the headline above his column today was that Sutter pushed out by snowflake players.
Yes.
And he went on to be quite critical of the players for what they had to say about Darryl that led to him being fired. And he noted in there, he said, some of these players that were voicing their displeasure with Darryl perhaps should look at themselves in a mirror and talk to themselves there, because a lot of them didn't do very good last year.
Yep.
And, to my point, I think it is disappointing. Disappointing that these players in their exit meeting, and I'm told some of those exit meetings with these players, that they did it one-on-one, one player each with Maloney, and I believe Treliving was there as well. They 2 or 3 of them went an hour.
Yeah.
And most of it was criticizing Darryl.
Yeah.
And, these players were paid pretty good money by the Flames and consequently by the fans who buy the tickets to go watch them play. And you would have thought that maybe these guys would have put it upon themselves to play a little bit better than they did. Even though they had their issues with the coach, they were still being paid. It wasn't as though Darryl was taking money out of their pocket.
Nope.
So, little disappointment in the players, and not all of them, obviously, but the ones that were so extremely exhausted with having Darryl as coach, and probably were indicating they didn't want him back for next year. So he won't be back for next year. So we'll see now where it goes. The shoulders of the players are going to be a little bit heavier next year to perform, regardless of who the coach is.
Well, that's the net. Yeah. Okay. So he's gone. Now what are you going to do? And I got to be honest with you. I like Rick Bell and Ball. I like them both. But Rick Bell has been on, he was on the show before, and well, not this one, but the old show. And we talk about we talk politics with him when he'd help us through, the fundings and those sort of things. I get the point of view. I don't have a problem with the point of view, but I think the point of view, Pete, and I think that's what's at odds here. And again, not to tell tales out of school, but you and I had a very long conversation about this. The young player now is so much different than the young player from before. They have so many voices in their ears so early. They have so many things taken out of their way, their hurdles. If the team doesn't do success, the team's not successful. Well, that's not you. That's the coach. There's all kinds of, not all of them, but in some cases, there's a lot of coddling going on. And it's not
absolutely. And we saw that in Winnipeg with Rick Bowness, who's the direct opposite of Darryl when it comes to how he handles his players. Like, he's more of a pat on the back kind of guy.
Absolutely.
And when he did get a little bit tough, the players went up against him. It was, and in their exit meetings last week after they got eliminated, Rick was really extremely angry after the last game, and went on on with the media for about a minute there, and on a tremendous tirade about how the players weren't pushing back and all that type of thing. And then one of the players then were criticizing him for saying they should have done it in the dressing room with the players. And one of the players, Wheeler, said in there, he said, well, Darryl or Bowness gave us the game plan. We didn't show up. So Wheeler basically said what Bowness was saying,
right?
That the players didn't show up, even though, this was a team that was in first place in the league in January. And then, January, February, they fell apart. Then they had a players only meeting with about 6 or 7 games left in the regular season and got themselves in the playoffs. So,
Yeah.
but you're right, though. There's a different style of player today than there was back in the day. And I recall to a comment that Steve Shutt, I don't know if I mentioned on this program, but Steve Shutt, the former Hall of Fame player with the Montreal Canadiens, a member of all those Stanley Cup winning teams that the Canadiens had in the 70s. Scotty Bowman, the legend Scotty Bowman, was coach of that team, those teams. And Steve Shutt made the comment one day, we all hated Scotty, but we loved him the day we got our Stanley Cup rings. That's the players from that era, and the player from this era is obviously, as you mentioned there, Rob, quite a bit different.
Yeah, and one last one on this, Pete, not on this topic, but one last on this vein, and I would just say this, like part of it is suck it up, Buttercup. There is part of that, but I would say that, I felt Daryl, and I've expressed this numerous times on this program. I felt that Daryl had not adopted the new style of hockey with young players, and the game has changed. Don Maloney said it on Monday. These young players, good, bad, or indifferent, it's just you can't sit them and leave them on the farm anymore. They have to get part of it's salary cap because they're cheaper. But the reality is it's a faster league, and I just think that was, to me, more of an undoing than anything for Daryl. Maybe not, but that's how I viewed it. There's
no question that his not using very frequently the younger players certainly was something that had to be an issue that management was concerned about. But then, when look at it, when you're the general manager of a team, you're worried about the team now, or you're going to be worried about the team in the future. Well,
Correct.
The coach's job is right now. If it doesn't get done now, then I'm gone, which it turns out it was. Now, going back to the time when Daryl coached the Flames the first time and put them to the cusp of the Stanley Cup, going to a Game 7 in the Stanley Cup final against Tampa before ultimately losing, that team was playing a whole lot different style than anybody plays today. I mean, that in fact, they changed some of the rules after that.
Because of it, absolutely.
Not as allowable. But to go back to that, and I think this is the legacy that Daryl leaves with this franchise, in my opinion, is that if it wasn't for the job that he did when he came in and coached that team in 03-04, the Calgary Flames may not be in the city today.
Yep.
When you look at it, I mean, you're going into that season, the Flames had lost or not made the playoffs 7 consecutive years. And the start of that season, there weren't 7,000 people at the Saddle Dome for games that the Flames were playing. And I remember the game that they played in late November in Edmonton, lost the game, and then fell into last place in the conference. And that night, we're flying back on the charter from Edmonton, and we arrived at the airport here in Calgary, and I'm sitting across the hall or across the aisle from Daryl, and we didn't talk at all on the flight back. Daryl was in one of his moods. The team had lost. He wasn't too happy. But when we landed, he leans over to me and he says, "Be around tomorrow. I'm making a trade." And Daryl gets a lot of criticism in his job as a general manager, but he made one terrific trade that day when he hired goaltender Mika Kiprasov. Because that team then went from being in last place to a team getting into the playoffs and winning 3 rounds against teams that were well ahead of them in standing, and then almost beating Tampa to win the Stanley Cup. So that to me is a legacy that Daryl should be remembered by in his time as coach of the Calgary Flames, because without that year, we not be talking about the Flames today.
No, and I know there's some people probably go, "Oh, that's just hyperbole." No, it's not hyperbole. And I do find it a little bit frustrating sometimes that we don't have, we have short-term memory. We don't have long-term memory.
Yeah. Let me follow up on that, Rob.
Go ahead.
The no playoffs for 7 years, then got in the playoffs and made that great run. The next year, there was no hockey. The NHL was locked. Players were locked out, and that was for the entire season.
Right.
So if the Flames had gone 8 straight years with no playoffs, then no hockey at all the next year, I don't think the fans would be coming back to the Saddle Dome and the Red Mile. There
wouldn't have been a Red Mile.
There wouldn't have been a Red Mile. That's right, absolutely. And the Sea of Red would not have been formulated, getting back in sellout crowds for the next season and the next season after that. So, that's the big issue there. Not only was the team bad until they had that great run, but then there was a significant factor in not having any hockey in the league after that year.
And they're connected because, Daryl's team that got to the Stanley Cup final and may have lost to Tampa Bay. I don't think they did, but all right. They were still competing with the Canadian Equivalency Fund. It was
Yes,
that
that's right.
only that lockout. The reason there was a lockout, the reason there was no hockey was for a week was to get cost certainty. That's what we were told. And Pete, again, it's not hyperbole. It's very easily this team could have been somewhere else if that had never happened.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the ownership were very steadfast in wanting to keep the team here, and there were a lot of cash calls for the owners over that downtime, and they paid they paid for it, figuring eventually things will turn around, and eventually they did when the salary cap came in. And to your point, one of the Flame owners said to me after that series against Tampa in '04 that if I'd have known we were going to get this close to the cup, I'd have given Daryl more money for better players. So there you go. So it's and then again, like I say, everything turned around, and they've had a lot of rosy days since then. And hopefully that things can get turned around. They can have a lot more outstanding days down the road.
I want to get into the combined search and how rare it is for the Flames to be looking for a head coach GM at the same time. But before I do that, you said something that I picked up on too, Pete. You were talking about Don Maloney, and he had said that he had talked to everybody. Did your ears prick up a little bit when he included prominent agents in there too?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
Very much. I was quite surprised with the fact he mentioned that he talked to agents, because normally I hadn't really heard, now not this isn't to say it didn't happen, but I had never heard tell of agents being asked their opinions on a specific team and how their clients felt and all that type of thing. It was really surprising when Maloney did make that comment that he talked to a group of player agents in his route in making the decision that they made. So yeah, very surprising. So it's a new world, like you were saying. It's a whole different time, and in some respects, you have agents with these players. Sometimes the players talk to these agents more than they talk to anybody else. Sometimes they talk more to them than they do to their wives. And, when they've got things they want to complain about, they just pick up the phone and call them, and the agent sits there and listens and offers some advice and that sort of thing. So, but it was really surprising to see that the Flames did go out and talk with a bunch of them there.
I thought that, I was a little critical of Don Maloney and John Bean a couple weeks ago because I just felt that press conference felt awkward and, not sure what it did for the fan base. I thought Don Maloney held a hell of a press conference on Monday. I was really impressed, Pete. I thought he was in charge. He answered. I don't know if this makes any sense, but it almost felt like he was on the balls of his feet, that he was not back on his heels this time. I thought he did a great job.
Yeah, and to go back to 2 weeks ago when they made the announcement of Daryl being let go, that's a huge emotional thing for both John Bean and for Don Maloney. I think a lot of that entered into their performance on that stage that particular day. But you are right. Last Monday, Don Maloney, he was absolutely awesome. A week before, going back to 2 weeks ago, they were talking about Brad Treliving and his departure from the Flames, and I think that was a big thing for them because they were leaning on Brad for a lot of the things in his position as general manager. Then last week, by that point, Don had everything under control in his own mind, and even though it was a tough day telling Daryl he's not going to be coaching the Flames anymore, he handled it extremely well. In speaking with the media, which in return is speaking to the public with that news conference that they had and subsequent interviews after that he conducted. And I like the fact that he stressed the point that they're going to hire the general manager first.
Yes.
And then the GM can hire the coach. And that's the way it should be done.
Absolutely.
It always should be done that way with any team. And I think the last time I was on, we were talking about when the Flames got their search going for a general manager, and I made the comment they should talk to at least a dozen potential general managers from outside the Flames organization, if for no other reason, to get their opinion of what they think of the Flames as a team. Even if they've decided that Rob Kerr is going to be the next GM, they still should go out and talk to all these various general managers that have applied for the job that they think it could be good and could offer some insight. Now I'm saying when the time comes for them to look for a coach, they should do the same thing. Go out and talk to a whole bunch, 10, 12 coaches elsewhere and get their views on the Flames, because these guys may point out some things that you hadn't really thought about or hadn't really noticed with regard to the team, and it can all help make the team better down the road. So that's going to be, and what's interesting, Rob, looking up historically, it's been 23 years since the Flames hired a general manager and a new coach in the same year.
Wow.
which goes back to when Al Coates was the general manager and Brian Sutter was the coach. They both were let go after the 1999-2000 season. And that was a year the team had not made the playoffs, part of that 7 years in a row that we were talking about earlier. And they were let go at the same time, right at the end of that particular season. And it was interesting through the course of that season. Often, on the road when we'd have dinner or something like that, be around Al and Brian.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying, our team has got a lot of good young players here. We may, we're struggling right now to make the playoffs, but I think we're going to be a real good team in the future. And when you look back on that team that they had a number of outstanding players there that went on to have really good careers in the NHL. Val Bure, Jerome McGinley, Martin St. Louis, Mark Savard, Derek Morris, Robin Regier, J.S. Jaguar, Corey Stillman, Chris Clark, and Jason Weimer. I mean, those were all young players that were on that team, and all of them went on to have very good careers, some of them exceptional careers in the NHL. And then, so when they got fired, the Flames went out, they hired Craig Button to be the new general manager, and then Craig hired Don Hay as coach. Well, Craig lasted less than 3 years as GM of the team, and Don Hay lasted 68 games. In his first and only year that he coached the Flames, coached for 68 games, was fired when the team was in Columbus during the regular season. Greg Gilbert came in and then coached the team. He coached for about a year and a half, and that led to Al McNeil coming in and coaching the team for 10 games, while they went out and tried to find another coach, which eventually turned out to be Daryl Sutter. And so that's how the circle of life went all around on that. So it's a good thing. The situation now is they've got to get a general manager and a coach, get the GM installed, and then let him go out and have the search for a coach.
Anytime we can have a chopper story, it's worth it.
Yep.
Right? Because
that was like being around the team. That was like the grandfather coaching the grandkids. Al was around, and he was a very sharp hockey guy, a Stanley Cup winning coach with Montreal Canadiens back in the day. And, he was part of the Flame management team at that point. And I don't think he had any real desire to get back behind the bench, but the Flames are in a bit of a situation where they didn't have a coach and they wanted to do a little bit of a search for one. So he agreed to go behind the bench for a couple of games, I guess. And as it turned out, I think it was 10 or 11 games that he coached the team through, and players really liked him. There's no question about that. And, he coached the team as hard as he could, just like he was back in his heyday as a coach. So that was a real interesting time when that was going on. Although behind the scenes, they were trying to get another coach, and we're having a little bit of difficulty doing that before they finally talked. Ken King, who was the president CEO of the team, then talked to Daryl and finally convinced him to take the job. Daryl had been fired by San Jose earlier that particular season, and he was getting a little bit of a break, and that's when the Flames brought him in about the midway point of that 02-03 season, and then he got his first full season in the one we talked about earlier, the 03-04 campaign.
A little bit of a break. He was at the NFR, right? He was down in Vegas at the National Finals Rodeo, I think, when they finally got him, hold of him.
That's right.
So when they're doing all of this, Pete, this is before social media, this is before analytics and things like that. But Craig Button was one of the hot names in hockey. He was part of the Dallas organization. He came from a bloodline. His dad and his mom both had prominent roles in hockey. His brother was working in hockey. This was, I think of all the young names that are getting all the AGMs that are getting thrown out now. Craig Button was that, right? He was kind of the hot property at that point.
He was. There's no question about that, because he'd been part of the management team for the Dallas Stars, as you mentioned. Yep. They won the Stanley Cup in 1999, so the timing in there was pretty good. And they had developed a lot of good hockey players on that team, and he had scouted a whole bunch of them. And he had some experience in management at a lower level than being general manager, but he did come in with some very high credentials. And he continues to be active in the hockey scene with his reporting and insights on TSN. So
he was on the show before us.
Was he?
He was on Barn Burner today.
Okay. He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. And Don Hay was a really well thought of young coach too at that time, right? Like,
yeah, he'd won, I don't know, 3 or 4 Memorial Cups as a coach that time with Kamloops. And I think he coached again there, didn't he, for a year or two?
He did, yep.
And, and then Don, so that didn't last very long, unfortunately, Don coming in as coach. That team was having a real tough year. They lost some of those players that I was talking about earlier, that Al Coates and Brian Sutter had put together. And one of them, including Arnaud Saint-Louis, which they just let go and got nothing back in return. And he went on to be a Hall of Fame player, Stanley Cup winner with another time when or the time Tampa won the Cup. He played a major role in beating the Flames in that best of 7 playoff series. So it was a tough go at that particular time for the team. And then Craig Gilbert came in, and he ended up in a big fight with one of the players, Mark Savard. And I know I watched Craig Button on TV not long ago on TSN make the comment that if he could have done it over again, he would have fired Greg Gilbert instead of trading Mark Savard.
Right.
But he said his lack of experience and that type of thing. He felt that there was Gilbert didn't like Savard. He was benching him, didn't play him very much, and Savard was criticizing the coach. And so in that particular case, the coach won instead of the player. But Craig admits now that he should have gone the other way. So anyway, but that's all part of the Flame past, and now they've got the future to look forward to.
One of the great crimes in hockey is that you called the first game in the Saddle Dome. You should have had the chance to call the first game in a new arena, but this has been dragging out for years. But Pete, we appear to have an agreement in principle. Your thoughts on what was announced a week ago or so by the province, the city, the Flames?
Well, I think, Rob, the province getting involved and pledging money to get this project completed was the key to the whole thing. As we all know, a couple of years ago, it all fell through when the new mayor came in and wanted more money from the Flames for some things for the new building, that type of deal. And then at that point, Murray Edwards and the Flames ownership said no, or out of the deal altogether. And then it didn't seem they were making a whole lot of progress. I know the city had brought in the OVG group, which is a group from the United States, which owns a whole bunch of not owns, but is managing a whole bunch of buildings in the United States, including the arena where the Seattle Kraken play their games, the football stadium in Las Vegas, football stadium in LA, and a whole bunch of other stadiums. And the idea there was to have the Flames put money into it, this group put money into it, and the city put money into it. And my indication is that the Flames were not all that interested in having another party be management of the building. They wanted to manage the building themselves. And it goes back to the day when the Flames moved into the Saddle Dome back in 1983. At that time, the Stampede Board was managing the Saddle Dome. And after 1 year of that, the Flames went back to the city and said, we'd like to run the management of the building, which they eventually got. And it was a nice working arrangement they had there. So even though they looked upon the new group coming in, OVG, of putting some money into the project, the Flames weren't overwhelmed with the idea of having another party run the building. So when the province came in with their input, I think that's when the deal started to look like it was going to happen. When Gary Bettman was here, late in the regular season, I believe it was late February, early in March, he made the comment that he talked to the mayor and he said, this is the best it's been in 10 years in getting something positive going with the new arena. And I believe it was that time that the province got themselves involved in mentioning they were going to help out with the financing. So to me, it's and the building that they're going to build now is going to be much different from what they were going to build back then. Yeah. And it's going to be much more extravagant than they were talking about then, which will make it more comfortable for the fans. So it's excellent that they're, that the new arena, at least they've got a proposal for it, and hopefully it'll go forward. The election, of course, is on, and that sounds like it's going to be a very interesting issue among the parties there as they chat back and forth leading up to that May 29th vote. But hopefully nothing happens that's going to kill this this proposal or plan for the new arena. And once that is built, it's going to be quite an electric place down there in that area of the city. And there'll be a lot of more activity with people going there for all kinds of different events, not only hockey.
Yeah.
There's going to be a second rink there, so the minor hockey teams can go in there and have practices, and so they're hanging out around the area where the NHL players are, and all that sort of thing. So I think it's a huge positive in many, many ways.
Yeah, I kind of love the overall vision of it. I really do. I'd like to see pictures. I'm just I'm visual that way, and I don't know. Well, there aren't pictures yet. I don't think they've decided on those types of things.
No, I haven't seen any either. No,
yeah,
no.
I'd like to, and I'm a little. I would just wish that practice facility was bigger, Pete. I think Edmonton wishes their practice facility was bigger. I think everybody that's built one says, "Geez, I wish we built it to 4,000 or 5,000." Give some flexibility with no corral around anymore. It feels like that size would really work in this city to complement a new arena.
Yeah, and the indication is that second arena you're talking about is going to seat about 1,000 people.
Yeah,
which certainly would be much better served if it was 4,000 or 5,000.
Right. Well, we wait and see.
Maybe that'll happen. Who knows?
Oh, sure, maybe. I mean,
but for now, we get the building. So.
Like I said on Monday, I would kind of wish the other side of this political coin would have come out on Monday and said, "No, we agree with the arena, and we're going to build a football stadium too." That would have been fantastic. It didn't work that way. I'm still waiting for that. It didn't work that way. Let's get to the playoffs. I got a little Flames we'll come back to, but let's go to the playoffs first, Pete. Man, it just the first round was wild. We've started the second round. It just feels a little scrambly right now. Has it been difficult for teams to get dates and put things together?
Well, it's pretty incredible what's happened. When you look at all the upsets we had in round one, and then upsets again last night. Two prominent teams were beaten by lesser lights of barely squeaked into the second round of the playoffs. And what's really interesting is that they announced it last night. The road team has won 33 games already in the playoffs. All last year, the road team won 35 games. That was through the entire playoff run. So it seems to a point now where teams don't care where they're playing. They're going to be able to play their top game, even if the crowd is cheering against them and in some cases booing them and that type of thing. It doesn't seem to be a bother at all to these teams. They come into the foreign rinks and are able to play as well as they do on their home rinks. And I think that's been a big part of all of that. But, you sit there in the first round. I did my little predictions on my bracket for the playoffs. I got 5 out of 8 right.
Oh.
And after last night, I'm down a game in 2 series. And so, because I predicted that the Toronto would beat Florida in that series, which they still may do.
Sure.
And I figured that Dallas would beat Seattle, but of course Seattle turned around and won that opening game of the series last night. So there's still time for these teams that I selected to win, but now it's getting a little bit tougher. And it's hard to figure out. But again, we go back to the modern day player.
Yeah.
Perhaps they have a different state of mind when they go into these various games, even though they're overwhelming underdogs.
Well, to that end, I wonder if it's an anomaly or if it's a trend, because you said last year was a grand total of 35, right, through the whole playoffs,
Yep.
and Edmonton wins tonight and Jersey wins tonight, and they've tied it already, one game into the second round. Yep. I almost wonder if it's the opposite, Pete, of the visitor, if it's the home teams. I just wonder if it's becoming a little suffocating at home. Like, you better win. Like, you better win. You don't want the crowds turning on you. I mean, the crowds have seemingly been awesome, but like Toronto, they were booing them off the ice in the first game of the last round. Like, it's not a lot of love there.
Rangers got booed off the ice and at home, and no, you're absolutely right. And to me, I don't like that when the fans can do whatever they want. They're paying. Sure. They're paying the money for the tickets and that type of thing. But I just think that it's a little bit not very fair to the guys on the ice when you're booing them off the ice when they're having a bad night. I mean, you want them to come back and play well. you should be encouraging them instead of booing them off the ice. Be quiet, maybe, if they lost a game and don't say anything, which is fine. But all the booing you hear and the sweaters getting thrown on the ice the odd time when the home team loses and that type of thing, I'm not a big fan of that type of thing. But you're right. In Toronto, they were booing the team off the ice there in one of the games, and then when they won the series, everything was great. Party was all over they practically had the Stanley Cup parade after they won that series against Tampa. So that's the nature of the fans today. But like I say, the fan pays their money, and they can do what they like. So, but yeah, you're right. And I remember a few years ago, one of the general managers, I forget who it was, but he made the proposal that the team that finishes in first place in the division, when they go into their first round playoff series, play the first game on the road. They would still get more home games if it went 7 games than the other team that they were playing against. But the preference was play the first game on the road, then come home and play a couple of games at home, then go on the road for 2 more, and then come back home for a couple more if you need them. But that never got passed through. I know there was another time that the proposal was made at the league governors meetings that the team finishing in first place have 5 home games in a best of 5 series as opposed to 4, feeling that would give them a bigger advantage. But again, that was shot down, and the plan stays as it is right now, where the team that's got the higher point total during the regular season gets 4 home games if it goes 7, and the other team gets 3. So I don't think that's going to change from the sound of things.
No, you and I were talking about this on the weekend, because in the American Hockey League, in this best of 5, the top seed is given the choice. Do you want the first 2 games at home or the last 3 games? And it, I don't mind that idea of a little strategy. And we kind of got into, well, do you want to play 1-3 or 2-3-2 or 2-2-1-1-1 or you and I even proposed maybe they should play best of 9s, Pete.
How about best of 15?
Yes, best of 15s. That's right.
I know you mentioned best of 9. I was involved in a best of 9 way back in my days of broadcasting and being manager of the team in Campbellton, New Brunswick, where we had a 4-team league and 1 team dropped out just before the playoffs started. So the team that was in first place was having some financial difficulties. And so we had a league meeting, had to decide what we're going to do, since we had only 3 teams left in the running. So I made the proposal that the team that finished in first place, since they've got a few financial problems, should have the decision to play the first round series, a best of 7, against the team that finished the worst in the league standings, and the other team get a bye. So in this particular case, this team took that, their series, their best of 7, and then the next series be a best of 9 for the league championship. Well, this team that finished in first place, they took the first round series, the best of 7. They thought they were going to win it in 4 straight. It went 7 games, including the 6th game going 4 overtimes, which is still the longest game in Maritime Province's hockey history. And then they had to play the 7th game the next night. And soon after that, they had to play the series against the team that I was involved with. And that was a best of 9 series that ended in 7 games. So that's the last time. That's the only time that I've been involved in a best of 9 series.
What happened?
Now, I was involved in some best of 3 series in the NHL.
Yes.
My last the 1978-79 season, when I was broadcasting in Toronto, it was a best of 3 series that year. And ironically, the Flames in the first round played Maple Leafs played the Atlanta Flames in that best of 3 series, and the Maple Leafs won in 2 straight games. And then when then they changed the first round to a best of 5 series. And the Flames' first year here in Calgary, the first round series they played was against Chicago, and the Flames won that series in 3 straight games, and eventually went on to win the second round, then lost out in the 3rd round to Minnesota. But 1986 is the last time that the NHL had a best of 5 series in the opening round. And that year, the Flames played Winnipeg in the first round, and they won the series in 3 straight games. In fact, I well remember the last game in Winnipeg. The first 2 were in Calgary. The next one was in Winnipeg. And the game went to overtime, and Lanny McDonald scored the winning goal. The assist went to Doug Ricebrough and John Tonelli. So the veterans on the team were the big factor in gaining that victory over the Jets back then.
They carried the day, as they say.
They did, those guys, yes. And then after that series, the Flames went on to play the Edmonton Oilers. And that was the big series where the Flames won out in 6 games or 7 games, and went on to the Stanley Cup final before ultimately losing out to Montreal. So, and that was the last time the NHL had a best-of-5 series. And 78-79 was the last time they had a best-of-3 series in the first round. After that, the other rounds were all best-of-7.
And
never had a best-of-9 that I know of in the NHL, but maybe back in the old days.
Well, maybe it'll come. Television will want it. We want best-of-9s. Can you imagine that? We'll run the playoffs into August.
Yeah, and training camp starts in September.
Sure. So. Speaking of the last time 2 Canadian teams met in the Stanley Cup final was
1989.
Yep.
When the Calgary Flames and Montreal Canadiens met. That series saw the Flames win in 6 games, and that's the last time 2 Canadian teams had played in the Stanley Cup final. Now there's a chance it could happen this year.
There's a chance.
The 2 teams left, Edmonton and Toronto.
It's a chance, Pete. It's a chance.
It's a chance.
You never
I don't
know.
think that the U.S. television networks would like it.
Oh, can you imagine that? Can you because of course they're doing the same thing they always do, right? Like look at our numbers. We've never had this, but it's the most watched game on a Tuesday night by 2 teams from the Western Hemisphere. All that, they just do all those gymnastics, those mental gymnastics to tell you about how great things are. But can you imagine? Now, it would be. I think it would be great hockey if McDavid and Matthews played. I think, but I don't.
Oh, that'd be an awesome. Yeah, and the TV ratings in Canada would be great. Yeah. But when they have more, the U.S. one is a bigger television deal. It's got more countries or more cities rather in the NHL. But I don't think it would draw very big ratings there. But it would be nice to see another all-Canadian final.
Yeah, we can't.
Although I'm not so sure how many Flame fans would want the Oilers to be there.
No, and I'm one of them. No, but I also see that the next Board of Governors meetings would be, to avoid this in the past, we're going to limit the playoffs to 1 Canadian team moving forward. So we can never ruin TV again, right? Some of these big brains and these big thinkers. Now, you and I have talked a lot about this, and we keep this alive because it's important to both of us. But a very important story in Toronto it's funny. You texted me this story. And I think like 30 seconds later, Daryl got let go. So for about 30 seconds in our world, this was the biggest story going.
Yeah.
But the legendary voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Joe Bowen, and Jim Ralph, his color person, who were forced to do the games, from remote locations because they weren't traveling radio broadcasters. And certain people said, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. They're now traveling them in the second round.
Yes, which is very, very outstanding decision made by the radio broadcast owners to have those 2 guys on the road. They haven't gone on the road for a game since COVID arrived on the scene. And of course, that year that they played and they couldn't travel, and and did games then remotely from off a TV screen. I mean, that in those days, that particular year or 2, they had to do that because they couldn't travel, and they obviously did a pretty good job on that. But being a play-by-play broadcaster and myself, from the past time, and never did broadcast a game off a TV screen, I would think it's extremely difficult to call a game off a television screen. And unfortunately, in some instances, the radio stations that have the broadcast rights decided not to have their broadcasters travel for any of the games on the road that were radio broadcast in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and now Joe Bowen and as you mentioned, and Jim Ralph are going to be going on the road for the remaining games on the road that the Maple Leafs have, and some of that may have been spurred from the fact that Joe, unfortunately, 2 of the 3 overtime winning goals that he called in the Toronto series against Tampa, he called the wrong player, including in game number 7. And now I don't blame him at all. I mean, he's trying to call it off a screen. There's celebration going on. There's all kinds of things that happen around the net. And if you're in the building, who scored that goal. Unless there's the odd time you might have to wait a couple of seconds. And so I'm really glad that those guys are going to get back on the road. And hopefully the Flame guys who have been doing for the last 3 years broadcasting road games remotely will get back on the road and be in person for all these games that they have to call in the future. And not only is that, calling the game is difficult, doing it off a monitor. When you're traveling with the team, you learn all kinds of things about the players.
Exactly.
Not controversial things, but little tidbits that you can pass along to the fans that put them behind the scenes, giving them a little bit of look at what some of these players are like and that type of thing, which you don't get if you're not traveling with the team, because that's where you get to know the team much better than you do just being around them when they are at home. So unfortunately, this is something that's happened not only in Canada. Some of the American teams have done the same thing, but it's a good deal now that at least the Toronto guys are going out on the road for this playoff series, and will continue that way as long as the Leafs are in the running, and hopefully next year it will become a regular feature for all of the teams.
Pete, for some people this sounds like it. It's inside baseball, and why should anybody care? But it really is about the quality of the product. And I watched Mike Rogers, I watched Charlie Simmer on the road. Not only did they learn more about your team, but they also learned more about the other team, because they all had relations. Right. And it was so common for Mike, in the first period or second period, to say, I had a chance to talk to so-and-so today, and he told me about this. You don't get it by not being there. And it shouldn't always be about money. It should be about quality. Let's start with quality.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's start, and it needs to go that way. Right.
And another thing, you're calling a game off a monitor. Sometimes you don't know the goaltender's been pulled. Like if there's the 1 or 2 goal difference and the team pulls out, you're thinking in your mind they probably did, but I can't say they did because I don't know. Yep. Because you don't see the other end of the building.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes they'll put it up on the screen that the net is empty, but that doesn't happen all the time. And I know the local guys got confused that way a few times this year in calling games when they didn't know if the goalie was out of the net or not. And if they'd have been in the building, they would have known. Just a quick glance to the left or right would have told you that. And there's all those little things, and the jerseys that these teams wear, some of them. The coloring of the numbers is somewhat similar to the jerseys. That's tough enough to read them in an arena, let alone try to do it off a TV monitor, unless you've got a real close-up of the player, which, doesn't happen all that often unless it's, after the whistle or something like that. So there's all kinds of little intricacies there that the broadcaster misses out on, and consequently the fan misses out on. So it's all part of the quality, as you mentioned, Rob.
Let's do this. This State and Flames history. I think I know what it is. I don't know. I think I know what it is.
This is the day. This is the day. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Yeah. This is the one, Pete?
That's the one. The Flames eliminating the Detroit Red Wings.
What a game.
The powerful Detroit Red Wings.
Very powerful.
And there are two things that did for me. One, It made me very humble. And two, I believe that goal got me into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Oh, and I've often told Martin Gélina, who of course scored that goal, I've often told him, I said, you're the guy that got me in the Hall of Fame. And he just looks at me and he's, no. I said, you got all of the credentials, blah, 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 to be in the Hall of Fame. And you know why I say that is that goal, at that particular year, ESPN, the sports network in the United States, they ran every week, they had the top 5 highlights from the NHL playoffs and the National Basketball Association playoffs. And that goal ran as number 1 5 weeks in a row with my audio and the video that you showed on there.
Yeah.
So that was, and to me, that you wouldn't believe how many radio stations called me for interviews in little towns or little cities in the United States wanting to talk to me about that goal. And so to me, that was the key. And what was also interesting there is that, and I didn't realize this until the other day, I was looking it up, Martin Gélina has the record for the most series-ending overtime goals.
Mm-hmm.
He did it with the Flames in that particular series. Yep. He did it in the series before that with Vancouver. And he did it in 2002 when he was playing for the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yep.
He finished a Game 7 with the overtime winning goal. So Marty should be in the Hall of Fame.
He should be.
All those key goals he scored. Now, the part that humbled me about all of this is that after he scored the goal, I yelled out 3 yeah babies.
Triple yeah babies. Yep.
Yeah. One would have been suffice, considering it was a second-round playoff series. And I remember afterwards that I was down in the hot stove lounge with you guys, yourself and Mike and some other people there, and they replayed the goal. And when I heard it, I heard the 3 yeah babies there, I said, oh, no. I think I said, Danny Gallivan's going to hate me for this, because Danny was my broadcasting idol. And anyway, so I got home that night. I couldn't sleep. And I was really concerned about it. So the next day, the first thing I did was down to the Saddle Dome and go into Daryl Sutter's office. Daryl, of course, being the coach of the team at that time. And so I said, Daryl, I want to apologize for being so out of line when Marty scored that winning goal last night with the 3 yeah babies. And then he looked at me, he had that real stern look on his face, and I figured he was going to start yelling at me or throw something at me or whatever. And then all of a sudden, a smile came across his face, and he said, you know, I heard that this morning. It was outstanding. And so I felt a little better about it after that. So unfortunately, there were no other 3 yeah babies from that year, but there might have been if that goal Marty scored in Game 6 had counted.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, right? That would have been,
Yep.
Yeah, there would have been a couple of not, yeah. By the way, credit, that was the clip that we had was from CBC. That was Don Whitman, so that is not Pete. And the reference that you made, Pete, cannot stress this enough, is that goal hung around on those top 10s for a long time. Like this was before viral. There wasn't viral video. There wasn't social media or anything like that. Like it hung around for a while, and it was. Yeah, I just love it. 19 years ago today. Can you believe it, Pete?
Yeah, hard to believe. Hard to believe that time has flown by that fast. And it seems just like yesterday. I can recall that goal being scored. So
that's what I was going to say. For me, that year, that run, it seems like it was just yesterday. Things that happened 2 or 3 years after that feel so fuzzy and far removed. Like, honestly,
yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
we were talking about Mike Keenan. That seems like it was further away than that. Like that,
that's right.
You know, and that's like 5 years later or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's crazy how the mind works, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. But you know, another part of that game that Mika Kiprasov at the other end of the rink got the shutout. His third shutout in that series. Yeah. And he stopped 38 saves that day to preserve the win at the other end of the rink. And he had a streak going of 149 minutes and 11 seconds of shutout hockey in that series.
That's unbelievable.
I mean, he was phenomenal. And like I say, we talk about Daryl Sutter's trades. Maybe some of them weren't very good, but that one was top notch. Maybe one of the best in Flames history.
Well, we never do this.
The other two other trades in Flame history that come to mind here quickly, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, 23 years ago, when Al Coates and Brian Sutter were let go as general manager and coach, respectively. Al Coates made 2 of the biggest trades in Flame history, if not the biggest. He acquired Jerome McGinley, and he acquired Robin Regeer. Yep. No forward has played more games with the Flames than Jerome McGinley. No defenseman has played more games in the Flames than Robin Regeer. And Al made both of those trades under tough circumstances, because in the trade for McGinley, he traded Joe Nieuwendyk, who had left the team in training camp. And he only made that trade in December, the middle of December, right before the Christmas trade deadline. Actually, it was the night of it. And it was just an hour before the deadline hit that he made that deal that got Jerome McGinley to be a Flame. And then he made the deal for Robin Regeer for Theo Fleury. And after the Flames had tried to sign Theo to a contract extension, and that wasn't working, that's when the big money was going elsewhere. And then he made that trade to get Robin Regeer in a trade with Colorado. So and those guys turned out to be outstanding players. So Al Coates deserves a lot of kudos for those decisions that he made to make those trades under great pressure.
He does indeed. And you know what? Next time I see him, I'll tell him he said so, because I see him quite often. So I have no problem telling that, Dal.
Okay. Well, I think I told them that once or twice.
Oh, did you? Okay. As long as
over a couple of beers.
Oh. Pete, always
that got him to buy. You gotta. But no, in all sincerity, those were major trades that he made.
So we're going to say goodbye to you now, and you'll join us in a couple of weeks. I can only imagine what's going to happen in that time span because we lost a coach and got a building the last time we did this.
Last time I went off, I said, I wonder what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks from now. Probably nothing.
Probably
but nothing.
Here we are. Always
we had more than enough.
Thanks, Pete.
Anyway, have a good one, Rob.
You bet.
Take care, man. Yep.
Is there anybody better than the great Peter Maher, legendary voice of your Calgary Flames, our Calgary Flames, and just the best mentor you can have in the world, trust me. I am blessed, absolutely blessed to call that man a friend. He is our guest, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. Yeah, the green's coming and it's warm, but snow's around the corner. I hate to tell you this. It's coming back in the fall. 3 locations, McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, and Bow Ridge Road in the Northwest. Coming up on Friday, Eric Tahachuk. I'll be here. I just won't be here. Won't be in studio. We'll be doing the show off studio. Eric Tahachuk will join us. Monday, Ryan Pike's going to join us. Lots of hockey talk still to come. Reminder, we're broadcasting live from Treaty 7 territory here. It's an inclusive program. Everybody is welcome, and we are live in the Oodle Noodle studio. Local, loved, delicious since opening their first store back in 2005. Oodle Noodle has been all flavor and just the right amount of weird. 2 locations, 1244 17th Avenue Southwest, 105 Main Street North, Airdrie. Pickup and delivery. Why should we wait? We should not wait. We should get right to our next guest, and I'm really excited he can spend time with us. Good dear friend of the program. Again, it's like greatest guys in the world day here on the program as we go from Peter Maher to our dear friend Rob Cookson, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. Rob joining us today, I believe. Are you there, Rob? We can't see you.
I'm here.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Did you turn your camera on?
Yeah, it's on. There we go.
There it is.
There it is. Perfect.
I hate to say, for a former video coach, I would hope you could get the camera to work.
I'm not even close to being a video coach anymore.
No, I know.
But in the sense of what these guys do nowadays, I had my great experience to start with Roger Nielsen when I was in Philadelphia, but that isn't even close to what gets accomplished today with the access to video and the technology and the systems and that sort of thing. And I mean, they're so sharp. That's probably the biggest improvement in the game in the last 20 years, 23 years has been that aspect of it. And it's amazing. It really is. But hey, I'm really happy to see that you're back behind the mic, and I wanted to say that I think that the city of Calgary is so blessed to have you in the city doing what you do, and the hockey world is also blessed to have you back there. And we missed you. I missed you on the radio when you left there for a little bit of a hiatus, but now you're back, and I think that's great. I'm really happy for you.
Well, I appreciate it, Rob, and I appreciate you coming on. And we got you just like you have not been home for very long. The coaching journey has taken you across. Now, before we do that, though, because we just played it for Pete, Jack, can we do this again? 19 years ago today, I want you to tell me what you remember about this.
I remember a lot of that series, and mostly what I remember is how good we played and and when I say how good, it's just how strong we played defensively. And I always joke about the fact that, there's Jerome in the regular season and then there's Jerome in the playoffs, and it's not even close. And he always joked with me when he would talk about an 82 game schedule. And he says, it's an 82 game schedule. You can't be 100% every game. And but in the playoffs, he was just phenomenal. And he's huge. He's a large reason why we went where we went to in 03, 04. And of course, and I heard earlier when you were talking to Peter Maher, Mika Kiprasov was a big part of it too.
Well, and I was
really big part of it.
Because do you remember, I want to say it was like 56, 58 seconds into that overtime, he robbed Detroit. Like it should have been over. It was a 0-0 game going in overtime in game 6. And he absolutely robbed Detroit. And, this goes on. This is what, with a minute left or whatever in that first overtime period?
Yeah.
He was something else.
Yeah, he was great. And you know what I remember about that series as well is the fact that we played Brennan Evans in the had not played a regular season NHL game in his short career in the National Hockey League, but we ended up playing him, I think, about 6 minutes and 58 seconds, and had never played before, didn't play much afterwards. But Darryl had a lot of trust in playing those types of players, and he just, he expected them to respond, and those types of players did, and that was really crucial for us. And we went through I think we went through 9 defensemen in that series, not in that series, but in the overall playoffs, of one form or another that we needed to have. And I always remember that because the depth in defense in the playoffs is so critical, and as it is in the regular season. I mean, you can get by with a shortened version of a lineup up front with forwards, but not with defense.
No.
And you see some of the teams now, what happened to some of the teams in the playoffs, especially I think with probably a little bit with Tampa Bay, not only with Cernak missing, but they were shortened when they had to make trades to stay under the salary cap. McDonough was a big part of that, I think, as well.
For sure.
So
the other part of that series, and it's not necessarily portrayed in that game, but you would have had a really interesting point of view on it too, was Dave Lowry, right? Because Lowry was on the bench, and then all of a sudden nobody knows it, and he gets slotted in. He's playing again. It was kind of.
I remember that series. I remember in that series because he wasn't playing as much, and I think he came back into the series in that against Detroit.
Yep.
But I remember he wasn't playing, obviously, so he would go over to the casino in the afternoons and in Detroit. And I remember Kelly Chesla having to chase him down to find him where he was at, that he was going to go into the lineup. And so that was funny. Playing a little cards or something.
Yeah, well, just taking the edge off.
But yeah, he was. I think that was a great introduction, and Darryl really trusted him with the sense of what he could offer. And that's happened before, I think, in playoffs where they've brought key players onto the bench just to to give them some input and calm some players down, that sort of thing. So I think that's important.
So that was 19 years ago. Let's fast forward it up to today. As I mentioned, you've just returned from Switzerland. You're back with Zurich. You're back with Mark Crawford. You're back with the Lions. Tell me a little bit about the whirlwind, which has been the last 4 months for you.
Well, I didn't go over there till the middle of January.
Yeah.
And we had actually signed contracts in November to start coaching at the end of the season, this season, and going for the next 2 years.
Okay.
And so, as always is the case, there is, once and especially in Europe, once you have locked up a coaching staff, and the other coach that was coaching at the time had already signed a contract with another team, it's inevitable that those situations occur where they're going to make changes.
Sure.
And so, we went over there. Mark went ahead of me by about 6 games. I had some personal things to look after, and it was good from our standpoint that we got to know the players heading into the now, which is the next 2 years or longer. And, it was pretty exciting going back to Zurich because they just moved into a brand new rink.
Yeah.
That the owner built with a lot of his own money. And so that was exciting to go into that new facility. It seats about 12,000, and it opened up, brand new locker rooms and facilities for the players. And this owner is a tremendous owner. He is really respected in the European circles of hockey. He's very, very generous with his money. He runs likely about a hockey association that's as big as any hockey association in Canada. And he basically funds, in various areas, the entire association, let alone the hockey team, which is it's not as big as what you would find obviously in the National Hockey League, but it takes substantial
resources
to do. Yeah. And the fans that come to the games over there, they don't pay what you have to pay to come to an NHL game. So it's not a huge revenue builder for a fan base for the owner. And so, so it was nice to go back. We had, I would say we had just moderate success. We won the first round and then lost 4 straight in the second, in the semifinals. So that wasn't enjoyable in that aspect of it. But, we're in the midst now of changing over almost an entire roster, because we have, right now we have 4 new imports that we can sign. So that happens, over the next month and a half, 2 months. And so that's exciting, because that changes your entire team quickly.
Right. Right.
So it's like Calgary getting the 2 free agents they got signed up, coming into this past season. So that's exciting. And I enjoyed going back there because, you make a lot of friends. I was there for 4 years, which is hard to believe. I was there for 4 years. And so you make a lot of friends. Then it's a pretty good style of hockey over there. They're very passionate, the Swiss, about hockey. And that really is what makes it worthwhile. The buildings are sold out pretty much every night. Wherever we go and wherever any team goes in the league, it's a sellout. And we have about 12,000 people to every game. Bern has about 16,000 to every game. And so it's a good sport in a great country.
How much is the game over there changed? You mentioned your 4 years before, because when last we spoke about Zurich, for you and Mark coached Austin Matthews in his 18-year-old year. How much has that league changed since that?
It's changed a lot, Robbie, because they increased the number of imports that can come into your team. So when we were there, it was 4 imports. We had Austin, Marc-Andre Bergeron, Ryan Shannon, and Ryan Keller. And so those are the 4 imports. And then now it's gone to 6 imports, which changed the whole dynamics of your roster, but also the top Swiss players now who may have played against a third line. If you're a forward, now you're playing against you're playing up against a more difficult opponent. So it makes it a harder league for the Swiss player. And, obviously the budgets have increased tremendously. The game has got a lot quicker over there. The coaching has got a lot better, we feel anyways.
Yeah.
And so that's made it interesting. They, with the 6 imports now, you can bring in a import goaltender, which makes a huge difference in terms of your, just the overall success of your team. And so that makes a big difference. And obviously I think goal scoring has probably gone down a bit because of it, because the goaltending is really good.
Yep.
And so that's the biggest change. And, this year we had Alex Texier, who's going to go back to Columbus.
Okay.
And he's a young guy as an import. So the majority of the imports are a little bit older than that. They're, the late 20s into the 30s. So they come over with a lot of experience. But he was a wonderful player. He was really good. I hope he has success in Columbus, because he's a kind of a game breaker He shoots the puck really well, and he carries the puck well. So it'll be interesting to see how he transitions back to the National Hockey League.
And he's in a good place. I mean, not a lot is known. We just knew that he left, and we had heard he was coming back to the NHL, but in a good place, ready to come back?
I think so. I don't, I've had great conversations with him, as has Mark, and I think he seems pretty comfortable with life right now.
Okay.
It's a big transition for some of those players because, he lives in Chamonix, which is in the French Alps, and it's right next to a ski hill. So it's a pretty comfortable lifestyle that he had there. And then he got transitioned out of there. He went to Finland for a while. And so he's had a lot of change. I don't think it's that easy. I respect players now that come from Europe over to the NHL because it's a big change to your lifestyle and vice versa. For us, I find it sometimes a little difficult to get back into the swing of things when you get back to North America. I spent a lot of time the first couple of years getting up early and watching NHL games, which was, added to your day and the fatigue of your day. But now I just get up in the morning and check the scores. That's about it, especially in the playoffs.
Sure. Tell me about Champions Hockey League, and is that a bigger thing than maybe the last time you were over? I know that the internet and social has certainly, made the world very open to everybody, but we don't have that in North America. We don't have those, extra tournaments. That's a staple of play over there. Is that a big deal for you, Rob?
Actually, it's not a big deal this year because we're not in it.
Oh, okay.
And they've scaled back the number of teams that are getting in for one reason or another. And it has caught on to some degree, but not, I wouldn't say, as popular as the soccer or football champions.
No.
Not even close. And,
but it's that idea, right? But it's that kind of idea, yeah.
Yeah. They're, the soccer Champions League is millions and millions of dollars. Like that's not what this league's all about. This hockey Champions League. I think when we first started, we really didn't know what it was all about. When we were in Zurich back in the 012 or 013 to 017 season. So we really didn't know what it was about as much as it's got to right now. I don't think it's caught on as popular as what it should be, but it's still pretty good. I mean, some of those teams, I know, like teams in the UK, they get in the Champions League. It's a big thing for them because they get to go across into mainland Europe and play against top teams. And for us, it was good. The one year we did it, and we had some good success. I think that was the year we had Austin. The last year we were there. And so, but again, we're not in it this year, so I'm not really even worried about it that much. And it's scaled back. So, only two teams, basically now 3 teams are in it from the Swiss League only because the top 2 teams ended up in the final.
Okay.
And so they had to add one more team. So, yeah, I'm not worried about it now.
I get it. You talked about the new building. You talked about coming back. You talked a little bit about video. Tell me what are the resources like for you now in the Swiss League? I mean, is it very comparable to the NHL? Is it, for you and Mark? I mean, what are the resources that are available to you to help your team, develop?
Yeah, they were actually the resources are as good as what you would get from the National Hockey League in terms of what's available in the Swiss League. We have a company that provides all the analytical material you need. They break down the games for you. They do a lot of things that are really phenomenal. And there's people over there that are very passionate about the game. And they've the company that we work with is they're able to use the technology to put together systems and anything you need to examine to get prepared to play, and plus for your own team. And we have right now we don't have a video coach, but we'll have one when we come back, and he is responsible for a lot of the breakdown of the game and providing the material that we need. And we never had that even as far back as when we first started there. And so that's a great step. And it's actually this year, at the end of the year, we used a fellow that the previous coaching staff had used, and he was out of Montreal, a fellow by the name of Jack Han. And he was really good in the sense of breaking down the game and providing with details. So it's really good. It's changed so much. It's just impressive how much it's changed.
Yeah. Do you have much role with the minor hockey system? Because it's different over in Europe, because underneath you is the whole minor hockey system for Zurich, right? Or essentially.
Yeah. So what we have the top team, which is Zurich Lions, and then we have a farm team, which will sign 3 or 4 older players that have been in the Swiss A League for a while, and they have the option to bring in 2 imports, and then it's all young guys that are on that team. So we have that resource available to us, so we can bring those players up and play them if we want to. We have they have a U20 team that just won the Swiss League.
Yep.
And then the under 17 team and under 15 team. And so there's probably in total, there's 1,000 kids playing in that city. And then they can bring in players from other parts of Switzerland. And also they bring in a few kids from outside the country in terms of Latvia or Austria, those types of things.
Right.
They had Kevin Fiala played in when we were there, just before we were there. And then he went to Major Junior, but so he was a kid that came in. Tex wasn't a kid that played there, but he came to the organization as an import. We have a young kid actually now. He's a 16-year-old that will play next year. That is a Swiss Russian. Mm-hmm. So, they get some of them get their passport to play if their family or if their father played hockey there, and they played for a little bit, so they get the Swiss passport to play. They don't have a Swiss passport to live, but they don't count as an import. So, it's really impressive in terms of that. And it's a full-time staff. They have the staff right now is about 40 people in the organization, and they run the team and they run the association, and and the owner, they have great sponsorship, but the owner probably at the end of the day gets the checkbook out and provides support that way.
You and Mark have really had an interesting decade or so. I mean, you were there together. You were in Ottawa, were you not together? In Chicago together, and now you're back together. Just tell me a little bit about that relationship and how that's grown.
Well, it started in '98 at the Olympics,
right?
In Nagano, and then obviously I was in Calgary in 2000, and he had moved to Vancouver. So, we always kind of kept in contact. Mike Johnson, who's a good friend of Mark's, coach with Mark in Vancouver, and I know Mike well. So there was the connection there. And then one day he was driving from Vancouver to Cornwall, where he has his home, and he phoned me up, and that was the year I had left the Flames, and he asked me if I wanted to go to Switzerland because I was unemployed. I had coached the year before at the University of Calgary, which was good with Mark Howell, and then I said, why not? We'll give it a shot. And we've developed a really good friendship, as my wife and his wife have. And I know their family really well. Not only Dylan, who works in Vancouver, but his other daughter, Katie, who's finishing up her PhD in sports psychology in the UK. Mm-hmm. So we've developed a good friendship, and we have a good working relationship. He's a good coach, and he trusts me with what I do, and I believe in what he does. We have a very similar philosophy about what we need to do to have success. And, he's had several opportunities when we were in Zurich to get back to the National Hockey League as a head coach. We interviewed in Ottawa at the end of our tenureship in Zurich the first time. And then he interviewed in Florida before that. And so he's had several opportunities over the years, and they just haven't probably made the right fit. And so, but we seem to get along. We you have to have I think to go over there, it's important to go with some people that have similar backgrounds. It's tough if you go into, even if you go into Russia, it's tough to do that if you don't bring somebody in. And I think that was what helped us a lot, because we have a similar background. We have a lot of people we know from the past. Sure. He worked with Roger Nielsen at his hockey school, so we have that background. And, some of the people that were associated with Roger at the time, Mike Johnson's another one that we have a background with. So it's always good to have those types of relationships to go for long periods of time over there.
Rob, it just occurred to me, because you brought it up a couple of times. We're all the way over here in North America. You're on, you were working in continental Europe. What is the war in Ukraine like over there? I mean, obviously it has an impact in hockey. We know that. The Russians are not allowed to play. Belarus not allowed to play in the tournaments. Is it more omnipresent there than it would be over here in North America?
No, you know what? It's the one thing that probably makes a big difference to me is I don't really pay much attention to the news when I'm over there. I pay more attention to what's happening in North America. But in talking to a lot of people about it on different occasions, and people who are in the know-how, there's not a lot of attention paid to it for one reason or another. I know it's an important topic and it's important area of observation, and it likely shouldn't be happening. But for one reason or another, the Swiss are very, they're part of the economic union only through an arrangement. And so they basically function in their own world, and, they do a very good job of it. They're very supportive outside the country, but, they are internally a great country. So they just function that way. And I think that, they work well within the economic union, but they're more or less unto themselves in some respects. But that's not to say that they don't care about what's going on. That's for sure.
No. I was more thinking about, imports and how that all trickles through the leagues over there. We still see Canadian players playing in the KHL and things like that.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious about what that might have had in terms of ripple effect in hockey.
We did, there was a I think a lot of European players have come into the Swiss league that played in the KHL.
Yeah.
We have two players. We have Mikko Lehtinen, who was playing in the KHL. We had Lucas Wallmark, who was playing in the KHL. Yoho Lamiko probably would have ended up playing there. So that makes a big difference. So you get a pretty good group of imports coming in that could have played in the KHL, but have chose not to, which, is probably the right reason right now.
Sure. All right, let's bring it home. Your former boss is no longer with the Calgary Flames this week. It caught some of us off guard. Just your thoughts on, Darryl the second go round and it coming to an end.
I was disappointed. I think that, to be honest with you, you look back, every season has its own life. And, the 21-22 season was such a tremendous season for the Calgary Flames. And, you look at what they accomplished with the style of play they had, and everything meshed. I mean, the goaltending was great. They had an unbelievable top line. Yep. And I think, through change, there was change created within in the locker room. And one thing we know about Darryl, he's not going to change. in terms of what he feels is how the team has to play, and it's a tried and true formula for success. And that's not to say that he's not open and willing to talk to players and willing to talk to young players, that sort of thing. And that kind of I think that's got a little bit misconstrued in the media world. He's he's very encouraging of young players. And I remember when we were worked together, when I worked for him, we were always trying to bring young Matthew Lombardi and those types of players that came in when we were a pretty good team back in the mid 2000s. And so for me, it was a little disappointing. I think that, without knowing, nobody really knows what happens within the locker room. So we can't really make even the media. So we can only take different pieces of information from different people. And obviously, perhaps ownership felt that there needed to be a change. I don't know, but it was disappointing. And really, when it comes right down to it, I think Darryl would probably say, hey, I'm paid to get the team into the playoffs and I'm paid to win.
Yeah.
And ultimately they didn't reach those goals. And, that's what he preached to the media right from the get-go in September and early October. And he talked about being a playoff team. And I remember somebody asked him in a press conference about losing to non-playoff teams. And he goes, well, we're a non-playoff team right now. So, we're in the same boat.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right about it's easy. Stuff gets blown up and Don Maloney came out on Monday and talk to players, talk to staff, talk to agents, all those sort of things. And that gives a little insight. But the one thing that I would like to, because you and I can have this conversation, because I was critical of Darryl this year because I didn't think he was prepared to develop young players at the NHL level in real time. And that nowadays I think you have to do that. The example I've given ad nauseum is Matt Phillips. And, how much success he had in the American Hockey League, he clearly proved he could play down there, but wasn't really given an opportunity up here. Lo and behold, you have this season where, you have 33 one-goal losses and 24 overtime games and things like that. That was the only thing I was critical of. But, Rob, I just thought that was I didn't think that was a Darryl Sutter thing as much as it's just the way the game has evolved.
Yeah, and I think that, they had so many, when you have so many games that are close like they were, that they had, and, you're on the edge every game to win. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can err on the side of sticking with, the tried and true veterans that he had. Yep. And, maybe in retrospect, he could have, played Phillips more or
Pelche or any of those young guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, he makes those choices and that's what he gets paid to do. Mm-hmm. We know it's not a developmental league, the National Hockey League. It's a winning league. And that's what it's about. And if you're trying to develop players to play at the National Hockey League level in the National Hockey League, it's very difficult. And, you look at Ottawa, they've been trying to develop those players and it's taken a while. Now they're starting to get a little bit of traction, but I don't think that this market wants to lose on a regular basis. They want to be in the playoffs and they want to be close to the playoffs every year. So that's probably the mindset that is the focus, even for the new coach that comes in. I mean, you got to win. That's what you're paid for.
It is. That's hockey. That's sports, right? Like,
well, it's at this level in the American League, right. Or if you're in a position where you're the Boston Bruins during the regular season, you can probably inject those young players into the lineup and have some success. And but like this roster didn't allow that to happen in the season for whatever reason, didn't allow that to happen as much as it probably would have happened in the past. I mean, I would say, knowing Darryl as when he was a manager, he was adamant about young players being in the, bringing in young players and developing young players. He's very adamant about that even as a coach, about developing players. And so that's perhaps was a combination of the season, the way it was going, and where he had to focus on in terms of getting to the playoffs.
Ultimately, this is an organization that I think we both can say needs to find some stability, because this is now going to be the sixth coach in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
It's and you know what that's like. You just talked about it in Switzerland. You got 2 more years and hopefully more after that. It's difficult, especially in Canada. I use John Cooper as the stalking horse, right? He's had success, but Cooper's been down in Tampa Bay for 10 years, right? And you just look at
it's a different game down there in the sense of the attention that's focused on the organization and on the coach.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, not even close. And so that's where you give credit to those coaches who are in the mainstream of the media all the time. And you look at Toronto with Sheldon, and then you look in Marty St. Louis in Montreal. That they've given him a bit of a green light for a while, but eventually the history of that organization demands that you win.
Yep.
So, and Ottawa has had a very astute, media crew that examine the team, and that's really what it's about in this city in this country is the people are very educated in terms of making assessment on the team on a regular basis, and that's where it is the big difference, and also the attention of the fans outside of football and baseball and that sort of thing. So. Tampa Bay would be a little less media driven, although they're probably a lot more now in the sense that they've had that great success over the last number of years.
Sure. Just a thought. I mean, Peter Maher was on before. We were taking a look at this playoffs. 33 road wins already. There was all 35 all of last year. The road teams seem to be dominating. The wild card teams seem to be having success. You had this historical run by Boston that, sees them out in the first round. Any overall observations just kind of coming back with fresh eyes and looking what we're seeing this spring?
You know what? I watched the I usually right now, just because it's hard to spend a lot of time watching all the games, but I usually watch the 5-minute highlight package that the National Hockey League puts out. And I watched the Game 7 that New York and New Jersey played, and it always comes down to, and I hate to say this, it always comes down to how well you defend to win those crucial games. And you look at the one line that they had, the Rangers, Tarasenko was -3, and Zibanejad was -3, and Kreider was -4, and they couldn't defend in that game. And you look at the amount of comebacks where teams have had huge leads and they've lost them, and it's the mindset of how you defend when you have a lead and how you shut down other teams, and it doesn't happen as much anymore. I've never seen games where there's been such huge swings in scores and periods and that sort of thing. And I don't know if it falls on deaf ears or it's just, we're going to just see if we can outscore the other team and the other team can't adjust. And the goaltending is not been in those games has been as good as it could be, but those are things that complicate the issues as well.
Yeah, but I feel for goaltenders because it's such a picked apart business now.
Yeah.
What?
But if you're
what's realistic? I mean, what's realistic and what isn't realistic, right?
But if you're like Skinner and you have the puck in front of the net and you turn it over like that, I mean, they're just, Edmonton was very lucky just to get out of that game.
Yep.
And, those are things that's just the inexperience too.
Sure.
And so we've got, you look around the league and you've got inexperienced goaltenders right now that are trying to develop in the National Hockey League.
Yeah.
The kid in New Jersey, give him a lot of credit. He's been phenomenal, and hopefully he can keep it up.
Last one for you. What's it like watching 27, 28-year-old Austin Matthews now, knowing that, 10 years ago you had him as a kid?
I am glad he won it in the first round because, we lost in the first round with him when it was his only year in Zurich. And we lost 4 straight. So he's been on a bit of a dry spell since that playoff round. And I think, Austin is learning how to play a lot better in tight checking games and games where he doesn't have the freedom. He's a tremendous player and really a good person. His family is his mom and dad. We got to know really well when we were in Zurich, and they are really very, very focused on his career, which they should, which most parents are when you have an athlete like that as a son. And he was such a strong player during the regular season, but now I think he's just getting better and better and able to play in the playoffs. So
good stuff, Rob. Appreciate this. I'm so happy you're in hockey. I'm so happy you and Mark are having, success, but I know what you want. I mean, you want to win a league title over there. So I hope that comes.
Well, you know what the thing is? You know what we're finding over there is we've got an older team, and we have to get a younger team. So we're in the same boat as a lot of these players, a lot of these teams are in North America. So we're going to probably end up playing a 16-year-old next year who will be a very highly sought after player in the NHL draft in a couple of years, or in a year for that matter. And we're gonna have to play these players.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's about in Europe. We have to stay young. And it's always fun. We enjoy that. We enjoy the aspect of making it better. And I think that's probably why we have a similar views on things, is we need to leave it in a better place. And that's what we'll do.
Perfect. We'll get you back on here soon, but thanks for taking some time for us today.
All right. Thanks, Robbie. Take care.
There you go.
Bye.
Rob Cookson, everybody, former Flame coach, and now with Mark Crawford with the Zurich Lions in the Swiss A-League. Of course, brought to you by Ski Sellers Snow. They ski in Switzerland. I don't know if you know that. Ski Sellers Snowboard. So if you're going over there, maybe you want to check out skisellersnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. 3 great locations. Bow Ridge Road Northwest by the McDonald's, just over down the hill from Winsport. 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street. And McLeod Trail by Chinook Center. Some great deals on warm wear right now. I know it's warm outside, but eventually it will get a little cooler. Let's do this. Let's get to our final mile today. We kind of made light of this on Monday. We said, Snoop Dogg is going to be part of the ownership group in Ottawa, but Daryl Sutter being let go is a bigger story. And then Snoop went on Stephen A. Smith yesterday, and tell you what, he wants to buy the Senators, wants to be part of this, but I love this. He wants to start a Snoop Youth Hockey League outside of Canada. The kids need to know there is an option to play hockey if you look like me. The rapper founded the Snoop Youth Football League, which he said has sent more than 20,000 kids to Division I schools back in 2005. I jumped on this right away. I'm very critical of the National Hockey League and its glacier approach to diversity. DEI is, they want to do the victory laps and they take their times, and God bless organizations like the Flames Foundation, which are moving things forward. But this is a gift. This is an absolute gift given to you on a platter. Take this man. He should not have got out of that office yesterday without being whisked directly to Gary Bettman's office and said, how do we do this? When do we do this? Let's get going. A Snoop Youth Hockey League. He says only in the States. Guess what? We could use it up here too, because we need ways to keep kids involved. We need ways to find kids who do not look like everybody that they see on TV, to find a space and a spot for hockey. If hockey is truly for everyone, you ought to jump all over this. Yes, the man wants to buy a team. Absolutely. But look what he's done with his youth football league. Again, if it's a crime if the National Hockey League does not jump at this opportunity to have Snoop Dogg represent them in the sport. And he's genuine. He's been around the game. He's called games in Los Angeles. He's a character. Yes, he's a pro. But we always talk about that. We're always talking about getting more eyeballs, non-traditional eyeballs on the sport. Dude's everything. He's entertainment. He's in movies. He's on TV. He's a rapper. He's all of these things. But he's a cultural icon. And when a cultural icon goes, let's be perfectly honest, this ESPN NHL deal, it's good to a point. But Stephen A. Smith isn't blowing his brains out about hockey every day. He's got the NBA, he's got NFL. And then when you go on that show and you say that, jump. You cannot sign him up quick enough. Again, the NHL loves to dither. The last couple of years with some of these cultural issues post George Floyd, the NHL was great at telling you they're putting committees together, and then they put blue ribbon committees together with great names, and what do we see come out of it? Well, everybody gets a nice little, folder with their name on it, and they have a meeting or two. Do something. It's right there. Snoop Youth Hockey. Make it happen. All right. Thanks to Peter Maher. Thanks to Rob Cookson. Thanks to you. Thanks to Jack. Did an outstanding job putting this whole show together by himself. And I'm excited about it because it went off without a hitch. Looking forward to Friday. I won't be here. I'll be someplace special, so you want to tune in for that. Also, Eric Dahachuk will join us. Obviously, lots to talk about with Duha, a lot about the Flames, and a lot about the NHL playoffs. Barnburner's back with you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Till Friday, we'll see you then.
When there's two sides to every coin, then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks, and some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, Cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down and shut down. Sundown. I said it's all just a game.